Scotland's hills and coastlines stand the remains of hundreds of castles. Some rise proudly above their surrounding towns, restored and visited by travellers from across the world. These places were not built as symbols of romance. They were built for war. Within their walls, alliances were forged and broken. Prisoners were held, and rival families fought bitter struggles for control of the land. It is hardly surprising that many of these castles carry with them stories that refuse to fade. In Scotland, the past does not always feel distant. It lingers in ruined towers and dim stone staircases, in the echo of footsteps on ancient floors, and in the quiet sense that these buildings remember more than they reveal. Here are the stories of 10 Scottish castles, 10 castles whose histories have given rise to some of the country's most persistent ghost stories. Not the famous legends told to every tourist who passes through Edinburgh or Glamis, but older places, lonelier places. Castles whose reputations were built not on theatre or folklore alone, but on centuries of real history. History that sometimes left shadows behind. Number 10. Tantallon Castle. On the eastern coast of Scotland, not far from the town of North Berwick, the ruins of Tantallon Castle stand against the North Sea. Few castles in the country occupy a more dramatic position. The fortress sits on a high headland, with sheer cliffs dropping into the water below, and the base rock rising from the sea like a dark island fortress in the distance. From the landward side, a massive curtain wall once guarded the only approach to the castle. It was a formidable stronghold, and for more than 2 centuries, Tantallon was the seat of one of the most powerful noble families in Scotland, the Douglas family. The castle was built in the mid-14th century by William Douglas, 1st Earl of Douglas, during a period when the family's influence was spreading across much of southern Scotland. Unlike many castles, which evolved slowly over time, Tantallon was designed from the beginning as a powerful defensive residence. Its great wall stretched nearly 100 metres across the headland, creating a fortress that was both a symbol of power and practical stronghold. From these walls, the Douglases controlled vast lands, but power in medieval Scotland was rarely secure. Rivalries with the crown and with other noble houses often erupted into open conflict. And by the early 16th century, Tantallon Castle had become a focal point in the political struggles of the kingdom. One of the most dramatic episodes in its history occurred during the reign of King James V. The king had grown increasingly wary of the Douglas family, whose influence sometimes rivaled that of the monarchy itself. In 1528, James V marched against Tantallon. Royal forces surrounded the fortress, and artillery was brought to bear against the walls. But the castle held. The massive defences withstood the assault, and the king was forced to withdraw. It would not be the last time the castle faced attack. In 1651, during the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, Oliver Cromwell's army returned with heavier artillery. This time, the bombardment shattered large sections of the fortress. After the siege, the castle was abandoned and never fully repaired. What remains today is a haunting ruin overlooking the sea. Wind sweeps constantly across the broken towers. Seabirds circle above the cliffs, and visitors who walk through the empty gatehouse sometimes report a peculiar sense of being watched. But the most famous ghost story connected with Tantallon Castle began not centuries ago, but in the modern era. In 2009, a visitor named Christopher Atkinson took a series of photographs while exploring the ruins. When he later examined the images, he noticed something strange. In one of the castle's upper windows appeared the figure of a man. The shape looked uncannily like a person standing within the tower. The figure seemed to wear clothing resembling historical dress, something like a cloak or long coat. Yet, when the photograph was taken, no one had been inside the tower. The image attracted attention from paranormal investigators and photographers alike. Experts examined the photograph, searching for signs of manipulation or trickery. Some suggested it might simply be a trick of light and shadow. Others argued the shape was too defined to be explained so easily. Historic Environment Scotland also reviewed the circumstances and confirmed that no staff or visitors had been present in that part of the tower at the time. To this day, the image remains unexplained. Whether it captured a trick of the eye or something stranger remains open to interpretation. But standing among the ruins of Tantallon, with the sea roaring below and the wind moving through the broken stone, one cannot help feeling that the castle still holds stories that have not yet finished unfolding. Number 9. Crathis Castle. In the quiet countryside of Aberdeenshire stands one of Scotland's most beautiful historic castles, Crathis Castle. Its tall turrets and pink-coloured walls rise above gardens and woodland that seem almost untouched by time. The castle we see today was largely completed in the late 16th century by Alexander Burnet, whose family had been granted the land by King Robert the Bruce centuries earlier. Unlike the grim frontier fortress of Hermitage or the windswept battlements of Tantallon, Crathis was designed to be both defensive and comfortable. Its interior rooms were decorated with painted ceilings and elaborated designs. Even today, many of those ceiling paintings survive, offering a glimpse into the artistic tastes of the Scottish Renaissance. Yet, beneath the beauty of Crathis Castle lies one of the most persistent ghost stories in Scotland. For generations, people have spoken of a mysterious figure known as the Green Lady. The legend tells of a young woman who once lived within the castle walls. The details of her story vary depending on who tells it. The central tragedy remains the same. According to the tradition, the young woman gave birth to a child within the castle. The circumstances of the birth were difficult, and both mother and child are said to have died soon afterward. Servants later claimed to hear strange sounds coming from the room where the woman had stayed. Soft footsteps, faint crying, and sometimes the movement of something across the floor. Years later, when renovations were carried out in the castle, workers reportedly discovered something disturbing. Hidden within the walls of the room was the skeleton of a small child. The discovery gave new life to the old legend. Many believed the Green Lady was the spirit of the young mother still searching for her lost child. Visitors to the castle have occasionally reported glimpsing a pale green figure moving silently through the rooms of the upper floors. Others describe feeling a sudden chill when entering the chamber associated with the legend. As with many ghost stories, it is impossible to separate fact from folklore with certainty. The discovery of human remains in old castles is not unheard of. Centuries of occupation and renovation can easily conceal the traces of earlier lives. Yet the story of the Green Lady continues to be told, perhaps because it carries something deeper than simple fear. It speaks of loss, of grief, and of the quiet way memory can linger where powerful emotions once unfolded. In the long evenings when shadows stretch across the gardens of Crawford's Castle, the story feels less like a legend and more like a whispered echo from the past. Number 8. Hermitage Castle. Deep in the Scottish borders, far from towns and villages, stands one of the most forbidden castles in the country. Hermitage Castle. The ruin rises from the valley of the Hermitage Water in Liddesdale, a remote landscape of hills and moorland that once formed part of the turbulent frontier between Scotland and England. The first castle here was established around 1240 by the Norman nobleman Nicholas de Solis, who controlled the lands in the area. At the time, the border region was unstable and dangerous. Raiding families, known as border reivers, moved across the frontier, stealing livestock and attacking settlements. Controlling this valley meant controlling an important route between two kingdoms. Hermitage quickly became one of the key strongholds, guarding the Scottish Middlemarch, the central section of the frontier. The timber castle, built by the de Solis family, was later replaced in the 14th century by the massive stone fortress whose ruins still stand today. It passed into the hands of the powerful Douglas family, one of the most influential dynasties in medieval Scotland. But Hermitage Castle is remembered not only for its strategic importance, it is also remembered for the darker stories tied to its history. One of the most disturbing events occurred in the 1340s when a nobleman named Sir Alexander Ramsay was captured by Sir William Douglas of Liddesdale during a bitter political rivalry. Douglas had Ramsay imprisoned inside Hermitage Castle. Instead of executing him outright, Ramsay was reportedly left chained in a dungeon and allowed to slowly starve. When his body was finally discovered, the story goes that the skeleton was found with only a few scattered grains of wheat nearby, the last scraps of food that had fallen through the floorboards above. The story became one of the castle's most enduring legends. Over time, people began to claim that Ramsay's ghost could still be sensed within the ruins. Thin figure, presence moving through the empty chambers, and Hermitage Castle gained a reputation as one of the most sinister ruins in Scotland. Its dark appearance only strengthens that impression. The structure is heavy and compact, with thick walls and squat towers that seem almost fused into the landscape itself. Standing there today, surrounded by silent hills, it is easy to imagine why travellers for centuries have described the place with a mixture of fascination and unease. Number 7. Fyvie Castle. Fyvie Castle rises above landscape grounds and woodland, its pink tinted walls and graceful towers giving it an almost fairy tale appearance. Yet beneath that elegant exterior lies one of Scotland's most layered collections of ghost stories. The castle's earliest origins date to the 13th century, and over time it passed through the hands of several powerful families, including the Prestons, Settons and Gordons. Each generation altered the castle, adding new towers and wings until it grew into the complex structure seen today. But with each change came new legends. One of the oldest is known as the Curse of the Weeping Stones. According to tradition, the medieval prophet Thomas the Rhymer once placed a curse on Fyvie Castle. The curse was said to be connected to 3 mysterious stones hidden somewhere within the building. These stones, known as the Weeping Stones, were believed to bring misfortune to the families who owned the castle. Legend claims that for centuries, the eldest sons of those families often died before inheriting the estate, forcing the property to pass to younger relatives instead. Of the 3 stones said to be connected with the curse, only one is known today. It is displayed within the castle. The others remain lost. Whether coincidence or superstition, the legend has survived for hundreds of years. But the most famous ghost associated with Fyvie Castle is not a stone. It is a woman. Her name was Lilias Drummond. She was the first wife of Alexander Setton, one of the castle's owners in the late 16th century. According to local tradition, Lilias was locked away and left to starve slowly to death. Not long after her death, servants reportedly discovered something strange carved into a stone windowsill. The carving was her name. The story says it appeared on the night her husband remarried. Over time, the tale grew into the legend of the Green Lady of Fyvie, a ghostly figure said to walk the castle's corridors and staircases. Visitors and staff have reported sightings of a woman in green appearing in the upper rooms of the castle or fading silently into the castle walls. Number 6. Castle Fraser. North of Aberdeen, surrounded by farmland and woodland, stands another castle whose history stretches back into Scotland's turbulent past. Castle Fraser. The core of the castle dates to the late 16th century, when Michael Fraser, 6th Laird of Fraser, began construction of the tower house that would eventually become the centre of the estate. Over the following centuries, the building expanded, growing into a complex structure of towers, staircases and hidden passages. Like many Scottish tower houses, Castle Fraser was both a residence and a defensive stronghold. Its thick stone walls and narrow windows were designed to protect the occupants during times of conflict. But despite the castle's strength, the stories most often associated with it are not tales of battle. They are tales of tragedy. One legend tells of a young princess who was murdered while sleeping in one of the castle's upper rooms. According to the story, the child was killed during a violent feud between rival families. Her body was dragged down the stone staircase, leaving a trail of blood across the steps. Servants later tried to scrub the stains away, yet the story says the marks returned. Unable to remove them completely, the staircase was eventually covered with wooden panelling. Visitors today sometimes report hearing the faint sound of footsteps on the stairs late at night. Others claim to sense the presence of a child moving through the upper floors. The legend of the ghost child has been told for generations, although historians caution that the details have likely changed over time. What is certain is that Scotland's clan history was often violent. Feuds between families could erupt suddenly and without warning, and castles like Fraser sometimes became the setting for those deadly confrontations. Whether the ghost child truly exists is impossible to prove, yet the story continues to be told by guides and locals alike. And in a building where centuries of lives unfolded behind thick stone walls, it is perhaps not surprising that some memories seem reluctant to fade. Number 5. Dirleton Castle. A few miles inland from the windswept coastline of East Lothian lies the quiet village of Dirleton. It is a peaceful place today, surrounded by farmland and gardens. But rising above the village are the ruins of a fortress that once stood at the centre of centuries of conflict. Dirleton Castle, the first castle here, was built in the 13th century by the Anglo-Norman de Vaux family, who had been granted lands in Scotland during the reign of King David I. From the beginning, the castle served an important defensive role. The nearby coastal route between England and Scotland made the region strategically valuable, and Dirleton became part of a chain of strongholds guarding the eastern approaches to Edinburgh. Over the following centuries, the castle passed into the hands of several noble families, including the powerful Halbertons and later the Ruthvens. Each generation expanded the structure, adding towers, halls and defensive walls. Yet, for all its beauty today, Dirleton Castle once endured some of the most violent moments in Scotland's medieval history. During the Wars of Scottish Independence, the castle changed hands several times between Scottish and English forces. In 1298, English troops under King Edward I captured the castle and destroyed large parts of its defences. Years later, it was rebuilt and strengthened once again. But conflict returned repeatedly to these walls. By the 17th century, the castle had already begun its slow decline, and after heavy damage during Oliver Cromwell's campaigns, it was largely abandoned. Today, visitors walk through the quiet remains of its halls and towers, surrounded by gardens that have grown where soldiers once stood guard. Yet, among the ruins, there is one place where the atmosphere changes. Beneath the castle lies a chamber known as the Pit Prison. It is a dark, narrow vault where prisoners were once held in miserable conditions. Only a small opening above allowed food or water to be lowered down. Stories passed in locally claim that prisoners sometimes died within the vault and were left there until their bodies could be removed. Visitors who descend into the chamber today often describe a strange sensation, a heavy stillness, a sudden chill in the air. Some report hearing faint sounds, movements or whispers that seem to echo through the stone. Perhaps it is simply the oppressive nature of the chamber itself. Yet the silence of the vault has helped keep the reputation of Thirlton Castle alive as one of the more quietly haunted ruins in eastern Scotland. Number 4. Dunvegan Castle. Far to the west, across the sea on the Isle of Skye, stands a castle whose history stretches back nearly 800 years. Dunvegan Castle. Unlike many of the castles we have explored, Dunvegan is not a ruin. It remains the ancestral home of the Clan MacLeod, one of the oldest surviving clan seats in Scotland. The earliest fortifications on the site likely date to the 13th century, when the MacLeods established themselves as one of the dominant clans in the Hebrides. Over the centuries, the castle expanded into a complex residence overlooking Loch Dunvegan. Inside its walls are preserved many remarkable historical objects, including the fairy flag of Dunvegan, an ancient silk banner that clan tradition claims possesses magical powers. But Dunvegan also carries a ghost story tied deeply to the clan's history. It is said that the castle is haunted by the spirit of a figure known as the Phantom Piper. The legend dates back several centuries. According to tradition, the MacLeod chiefs once ordered a young piper to explore a mysterious tunnel said to run beneath the castle cliffs. The tunnel supposedly connected the castle to the sea, but no one knew exactly how far it extended. To keep track of his progress, the piper was instructed to play his pipes as he walked through the darkness. Sound of music echoed faintly above ground as he moved deeper beneath the earth. For a time, the pipes could be heard clearly. Then, slowly, the music grew fainter, and finally it stopped altogether. Search parties later entered the tunnel, but never found the young piper. According to legend, on certain nights the distant sound of bagpipes could still be heard drifting across the cliffs below the castle. A thin melody carried by the wind. The music begins softly, and then fades once more into silence. Number 3. Inverary Castle. On the western shore of Loch Fyne stands one of Scotland's grandest aristocratic residences, Inverary Castle. The castle is the historic seat of the Dukes of Argyll, chiefs of Clan Campbell, one of the most influential families in Scottish history. Unlike many castles built in the Middle Ages, Inverary was constructed in the 18th century as a grand Gothic-style residence. Its tall towers and symmetrical design reflect the architectural tastes of the period rather than the defensive needs of earlier centuries. Yet, even a castle built in a more refined age has acquired its own ghostly reputation. Staff and visitors over the years have reported sightings of a mysterious figure known as the Grey Lady. She is usually described as a woman dressed in grey clothing who appears in the corridors of the castle before quietly vanishing. The identity of the Grey Lady has never been confirmed. Some believe she may be connected to earlier buildings that once stood on the site before the present castle was constructed. Others suggest the apparition could be tied to the long and complex history of the Campbell family itself. One detail that fascinates many visitors is the castle's great armoury hall, which contains hundreds of weapons and historical artefacts. The hall itself has an atmosphere that feels almost theatrical. Yet even here, staff have occasionally reported unusual experiences. The sensation of someone passing behind them when no one is present. Sound of footsteps in otherwise empty corridors. Inverary Castle remains a living residence today, and most days it is filled with visitors exploring its history. But once evening falls and the halls grow quiet again, some believe the Grey Lady still walks her silent patrol through the castle's long galleries. Number 2. Culzean Castle. Culzean Castle stands on Scotland's southwest coast. It rises dramatically above the cliffs of Ayrshire, overlooking the Firth of Clyde. The castle was redesigned in the late 18th century by the famous architect Robert Adam for David Kennedy, the 10th Earl of Cassilis. Adam transformed the older fortress into one of the most elegant country houses in Scotland. The building's sweeping staircases, oval rooms and sea-facing terraces give it an atmosphere very different from the other medieval castles in this list. Yet Culzean has long been associated with one particularly persistent ghost story. According to tradition, the castle is haunted by the spirit of a former Earl of Cassilis. Servants working in the castle during the 19th century reportedly claimed to hear footsteps in the corridors late at night. Doors would open and close, and occasionally the figure of a tall man dressed in historical clothing was seen walking along the upper floors. The apparition became associated with the Earl himself, whose presence was said to linger within the building he'd helped transform. Stories of the haunting became so widely known that some visitors began arriving at Culzean hoping to encounter the ghost for themselves. In the early 20th century, several guests even claimed to have seen the mysterious figure standing near the Great Staircase before disappearing moments later. Whether the ghost is real or simply part of the castle's folklore remains uncertain. Yet Culzean's position above the sea gives it an atmosphere that seems almost designed for stories. Waves crash against the rocks below, wind moves through the trees of the surrounding parkland, and the castle itself rises like a pale silhouette against the evening sky. It is the kind of place where history feels very close, and where the past never seems entirely finished. Number 1. Dunnottar Castle. Few castles in Scotland occupy a more dramatic position than Dunnottar. The ruins stand on a narrow, rocky headland just south of the town of Stonehaven in Aberdeenshire. Sheer cliffs fall almost vertically into the North Sea on 3 sides, leaving only a single steep path connecting the castle to the mainland. From a distance, the fortress appears less like a building and more like part of the cliff itself, stone rising from stone above the crashing water. The site has been fortified for more than 1,000 years. Early records suggest that a Pictish stronghold once stood here, long before the medieval castle was ever built. By the Middle Ages, Dunnottar had become one of the most strategically important fortresses in northern Scotland. Its position made it almost impossible to attack from the sea, and the narrow landward approach could easily be defended. Because of this, the castle became associated with several pivotal moments in Scottish history. One of the most famous occurred during the 17th century, when Scotland was drawn into the political turmoil of the British Civil Wars. At that time, the honours of Scotland, the Scottish crown jewels, were brought to Dunnottar Castle for safekeeping. In 1651, the army of Oliver Cromwell advanced north after defeating the Scots at the Battle of Dunbar. Cromwell's forces soon surrounded Dunnottar. If the castle fell, the crown jewels would almost certainly be captured or destroyed. The defenders faced an impossible situation. But according to tradition, a daring plan was devised. The jewels were secretly smuggled out of the castle during the siege by local women who carried them past the English forces. They were hidden beneath the floor of a nearby church until the war ended. Because of that act, the Scottish crown jewels survived. Yet, Dunnottar Castle also holds darker memories. During the 1680s, a group of prisoners known as the Covenanters were held within the castle. These were Scottish Presbyterians. They refused to follow the religious policies imposed by the monarchy. More than 160 men and women were imprisoned in a small chamber known today as the Whigs Vault. Conditions were brutal. The prisoners were crowded into the dark chamber for weeks with little food or sanitation. Some died there. Others attempted desperate escapes down the cliffs below. Visitors who enter the vault today often describe a heavy atmosphere within the chamber, a strange stillness, a feeling of sorrow lingering in the stone. Whether these sensations are the power of suggestion or something deeper is impossible to say. But Dunnottar Castle remains one of those places where history feels unusually close. Standing on the cliffs as the sea wind moves through the broken walls, it is easy to imagine the many lives that once passed through the fortress. Kings, soldiers, prisoners, and perhaps, if the old stories are true, a few spirits who never quite left. Across Scotland, hundreds of castles remain scattered. Some are ruins reclaimed by nature. Others continue to stand as homes, museums, and reminders of the country's turbulent history. Each has witnessed centuries of human drama, love and betrayal, war and ambition. Whether ghosts truly walk their corridors is something no historian can prove. But stories endure for a reason. And when you stand within those ancient walls, listening to the wind move through the broken towers or echo down empty staircases, it becomes easier to understand why some people believe the past is never entirely gone. Sometimes it simply waits quietly among the stones.